during the actual process itself, going to the mikvah, first of all, it's stunning. Like, it's beautiful. I live in Switzerland, the country of spas, and I was like, this is a real spa-like experience. I wonder if there's like a membership punch card or something, because I would go all the time if I could. But the actual dunking is very, and you prepare for it and you go in with intention and you say the blessings and everything like that. But that I really felt something powerful after that first dunk. And when I got out of the mikvah, we left and I really felt different. And I go out into New York City. It was raining like crazy that day. And, you're in the middle of New York City. And I was like, the city looks so beautiful and glittering. Like, my vision had changed for that moment. And people were being nice to me and smiling at me. Again, it's the middle of New York City. For anyone who doesn't live in New York City, like, that is not normal. And there's actually like trash everywhere. But it was like, I just like, yeah, I felt very different, and it was an amazing, powerful day, and it was a really just moving and emotional experience. And I got to be there with Rabbi Adam and the other Rabbi Adam Gindia, who I was studying with, and yeah, it was a beautiful, special, special day.
Welcome to this episode of Your People Will Be My People, Conversion in a Post-October 7th World. This podcast is sponsored by Project Ruth. Founded in 2023, Project Ruth formalizes Orthodox affiliation for Jews of diverse and varied backgrounds and welcomes those seeking Orthodox conversion to find meaningful connection to and understanding of Jewish life and practice. I am Rabbi Adam Mince, president of Project Ruth. I'm joined by my partner, Meredith Berkman, community activist and leader within the Jewish community. And today, we have the pleasure and honor of welcoming Tiffany Harris. Tiffany is the Chief Program Officer of MEM Global. She has a fantastic biography and resume, which she will share with us in the context of our discussion. But I'll just say that she's a former board member of both MEM Global and the Jim Joseph Foundation. She served on the Biden White House Jewish Leaders Council and currently sits on the new Leadership Council for the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Welcome, Meredith. Welcome, Tiffany. It's so nice to have you here today and to be able to talk about your journey, Tiffany and Meredith, that you and I can find out a little bit more about Tiffany's journey and to expand on our podcast, understanding the impact of October 7th on conversion and just generally the world of conversion today.
I just wanted to say, and I always say whenever there's a conversion in my synagogue or I meet someone who is recently converted, I just always want to say, welcome home, because I always feel that someone who converts is on the path that God chose for them, that they were meant to be Jews and they've come home to their people. So welcome home, Tiffany. We are thrilled to have you home.
Thank you so much. I was thinking today, I was like, wow, I'm one of the newest official members of the tribe. But then Rabbi Adam was saying you just came from a number of conversions. So it's amazing that it's happening so fast. But thank you. And I'm excited to be here. I love the podcast. I'm all caught up in my episodes, which is very easy because I listen to them as soon as they come out, but excited to dive into it.
Great. So Tiffany, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Jewish journey and we'll dive in from there.
Sure, happy to. So I think everyone who comes to Project Ruth or comes to conversion probably has a very, unique and varied journey. And mine is, I was born Jewish or born with a Jewish identity. My mom is Jewish and my grandmother is Jewish. And our great grandmother, who came from Hungary, as far as we know, is also Jewish. But we don't have like the halachic paperwork to prove it. That was part of the impetus of this journey. But I was raised with a Jewish identity, though I'll get into it a bit. I feel somewhat limited now from today's vantage point, but with a strong Jewish identity, a deep love of Israel. But at the time I was growing up, first in Boise, Idaho, and then in Seattle, Washington, my mom doesn't come from a strong religious tradition. It was a very, very, very small Jewish community. And growing up, I knew I was Jewish. I was very proud to be Jewish. I loved Israel, though I'd never been there. And this is like pre-Google, so I hadn't even seen a ton of pictures of Israel. But I didn't have access to all the tools that we do, or that we're lucky enough to have access to today, all of the Jewish learning, all of the different groups, virtual learning spaces, or just access to a Jewish community that I could, go to whenever I wanted to. So I remember learning about Birthright when I was in college. I was like 18 or 19 years old. I didn't know if it was a scam. It was very scary to me to like apply for a passport and then send in the passport and then go on this trip, fly to New York and then fly to Israel. I was like, I hope I'm going to end up in Israel. I'm not sure if this is a real program or not. It was bus 6, so it wasn't something that a lot of people knew about. But I did luckily end up in Israel. Or first, I ended up in New York, and I was surrounded for the first time in my life by Jews. I loved it. It was amazing. And I started to see people that I was like, this person looks like my mom, and this person looks like my uncle. And so was immediately feeling very comfortable and excited. And the person who sat next to me on the plane brought like 6 seasons of Seinfeld on DVD. That's, we'll tell you about like the time period it was. So I was feeling even more excited and comfortable. But when we got to Israel, it was such an amazing experience. It was the first time I had, my mom shared this narrative with me growing up, that because I was always very self-conscious that I don't look Jewish. For those listening at home, I'm a Jew of color. My dad's Black, my mom's Ashkenazi, Hungarian. And so I always felt this sense of I'm Jewish, but I didn't totally feel like I belonged. And I knew I looked different from everyone else. And I always got a lot of questions and things like that. And when we landed in Israel, I saw for the first time in my life Ethiopian Jews, Yemeni Jews, that just like the amazing breadth and depth of diversity that exists in Israel. People who weren't Jewish, who looked like me, and people who didn't look like me. It was just amazing. And so that, on top of everything else that you experienced during the trip, I just felt this overwhelming sense of home and a different level of belonging in the Jewish community than I had before. And I always knew that I wanted to go back and live there for an extended period of time. But I also was exposed to like, oh my gosh, I can have a lot of Jewish friends. There's like a lot more of us out there than, me, my brother, and the one other Jewish person in school. And they told me about a lot of different programs that I wasn't aware of and didn't have access to. So that really started this kind of longer journey of learning and being involved, and starting a Jewish student union at my college and those types of things. And that involvement has continued ever since. So I was a serial lay leader, as we say, and was on every board that I could be on, every planning committee, every strategic planning committee, and thought that would be, in addition to practice and home life, kind of the extent of my Jewish involvement. But I ended up living in a Moishe house when I moved back to the US from my time in Israel. And so I stayed involved in the organization. I should say Moishe House, now known as Mem Global, stayed involved in the organization again from a lay leadership capacity, and was asked to apply for the position I'm currently in 2020. So like many, many people, I was going through this kind of inflection point of, am I in the career that I want to be in? Re-examining my life and those different sorts of things. So I took a leap of faith. I left a job that I loved to an even greater job and opportunity. And I've been here ever since. But that was also a really pivotal part of my Jewish journey, because now not only did I have access to community and learning, but access to amazing rabbis, working in a Jewish organization professionally for the first time. So that really deepened my engagement and my love and my passion for the field and our people and our history. Yeah, so that's where we are today. And should I talk a bit about, we'll get into the conversion piece and the impetus as to why, but yeah.
Well, I have a question, if I could, Adam and Tiffany. So for the anyone who's listening would say, wow, so your mother was Jewish and her mother was Jewish, and it sounds like her mother was Jewish. So you are halakhically Jewish. So I guess that will lead us to then why convert. I don't have paperwork, even though I'm Jewish, my mother was Jewish, her mother was Jewish. So maybe that's a good way in, because from an Orthodox perspective, even the most halakhic, if your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish. So that hopefully is the question that can lead you into the specificity of your unique journey.
Right. So I think that this is a challenge that a lot of Jews in North America would face if you move abroad or if you want to marry someone who's Orthodox or join an Orthodox community. There's probably a bunch of different cases where that applies. But for me, my fiance and I, we moved to Zurich about a year ago. And the first thing I did, of course, being me, I emailed the Jewish community. I said, can I get on the email listserv so I can come to events and holiday programming, things like that, just like you would in North America. And you would expect someone to say, sure, welcome. We're so excited to have you. It's an Orthodox community, which is new for me and a really great thing. But you can't join the email list without being a member of the community. The safety and security protocols are very different outside of North America as well for reasons that are probably obvious to people listening. But so I said, okay, great. How do I become a member? And in order to be a member, you need to be halakhically Jewish, but also be able to prove that you're halakhically Jewish. What they want to see is your parents' kosher ketubah and your grandparents' kosher ketubah, which we totally don't have. And when I was talking to different friends and people in the community about this, like most of the Americans I talked to, they were like, I don't think I have that paperwork either.
Who has that paperwork? I can barely keep up with my kids' college, like medical forms. I mean, that's really, as you say, coming from New York City in particular, I find that really, I mean, Adam, you might have paperwork, you're a rabbi, but does the average Orthodox person even have the paperwork?
I want to tell you something. I could tell you my family's story in the United States back to the year 1890. I can tell you about their life in Poland. I have no paperwork. I can't back up any of my story.
So good thing you know about Project Ruth, just in case, should you ever need. But it really is, I mean, I think part of it too is that these are communities that have existed for generations. And I think the practice is quite common. I know in Latin America, in Germany, here in Switzerland, and also in Austria. So it would be a challenge that a lot of North American Jews face. And I know people in the community, their parents came from the former Soviet Union or different circumstances where they're like, we also didn't have paperwork. So I needed to go through this process. And at first, I mean, it was really shocking to me because it was the first time in my life that I was told, oh, and I should say that the first thing I did was I was like, well, can I offer a 23andMe DNA test? That's also not accepted. Or, maybe I'll put together like a binder of all my Jewish involvement just to show my commitment to the community over the years. And, none of that was sufficient, which is okay. But I, came to the decision that I'm going to talk about this with friends and people in my community just to get some advice and understand like how other people may have approached this, but also that I'm not here to fight the norms and standards and culture. I want to be a part of this community. And so this is a process that I'm going to go through. I don't know yet like how long it's going to take or what that's going to look like, but I want to be seen and fully counted as a member of this community. So that was, where it came from.
Did you feel at all, Tiffany, that, and I feel awkward asking this, but I know just from the way you're speaking, I don't think it will offend you. Do you feel like being a Jew, I mean, it doesn't sound like from what you're saying, but did you ever have the feeling, gee, if I were not a Jew of color, perhaps the questions would have been different? I mean, again, you're very, as you described the community, this is a very long-standing community. These are the protocols. So it's not, were they asking you for this because you were a Jew of color, but you described sometimes feeling when you were younger, I don't look like the way I thought Jews should look, and you were in a very small community to begin with. Maybe, I'm sure I doubt there were other Jews of color in Boise, in where you're from. But did you have any feelings related to that? Did anything come up throughout this process?
Yeah, I will say there have been many points, sadly, throughout my life where both I and members of my family, and even my mom, who's not a Jew of color, but has, children who are Jews of color, have felt and experienced that discrimination, sometimes overt and sometimes covert. 90+% of the time, it's well-intentioned ignorance when it does happen, which today, we've gone through a few reckonings in the North American community today. It's very, very rare, I can say. But I think in the case of Zurich, it was just more so that I'm an outsider. the approach is taken to any outsider. It's a very, very tight knit community. And so I think it had more to do with the fact that it's like, am I really committed? Am I going to be a member of this community? Am I going to come in and like shake things up in not a good way? I'm assuming that's where it came from. But it was, I met with the membership manager who was like this wonderful, very, very kind woman. And what she'd said to me was, she was like, well, this is just tragic. But I was thinking, well, it's not tragic. Like, I think I have options, right? Like, let's think creatively about this. But I left that meeting just feeling so stuck and so, that I don't even know what to compare it to, but it's like, think of something that's like a core part of your identity and someone telling you, oh, actually, you're not a woman, or actually, you're not this or that. And you're thinking, okay, what am I then? Or where do I belong? And so that's a piece I needed to process and talk about with different people. And that's what led me to Project Ruth. Somebody sent me the famous article, and I'm so thankful for that. But it also crossed my mind too, like, should I even tell people? Because I felt so like embarrassed about it at first, that like, well, I'm not really Jewish and I hold this position in the Jewish community. I've been involved for so much of my life, but I'm kind of like this secret non-Jew existing somewhere. So there's probably a small piece of me that like already feels in some ways inadequate because I look different and have somewhat of a different background that I will continue working through. But yeah, again, as it relates to Zurich, I think it was the piece about being an outsider more so than my racial identity.
So I have a question. First of all, thank you, and it's fascinating, and obviously Meredith, kind of pinpoints some of the interesting aspects of your journey. I'm interested in October 7th. You were Jewish. You were working for a Jewish organization. You were in leadership at a Jewish organization. But at the same time, like you said, you were a little uncomfortable about your Jewish status. How did October 7th affect you? And was your status did it figure in how you related and how you responded to October 7th?
Yeah, on the morning of October 7th, so I had a sense of what was going on or like almost as soon as I woke up. As you mentioned before, I work in a Jewish organization and we support close to 1,000 community builders around the world, and upwards of 230,000 participants annually. So there's a lot going on in my work world at any given time. And we support these global programs. And so I was assigned to, like, we have a rotating duty phone on certain weekends. And so I don't usually sleep with my phone like right next to my bed with the volume on, but we rotate this duty. And so that was a particular morning where I had the phone right next to me, and I have the red alert, the Seva Dome app on my phone. That was going off. I was just getting tons of, like, I knew immediately that something was not normal. And so when I checked, it was like this barrage of like horrifying videos. And at first thinking, is this real? Are these AI? Is this fake? Like, what's actually going on? And trying to piece things together. And then slowly getting the news stories like we all were. And these horrifying numbers just kept ticking up. And, and of course, like any given time, I have tons of staff in Israel. I have friends in Israel. I like have deep ties there. So dealing with that piece of it. But I was surprised because I don't have direct like nuclear family in Israel. I've spent a lot of time there. I certainly feel a sense of home there. I love the country, but I felt this like physical pain and like nausea that day, and just like it really felt like it felt like my heart had been pierced with something. I think that a lot of people listening, and certainly you on the call, can relate to that it was just so heartbreaking. And I was surprised that I felt that so deeply because I wasn't there. And, I found out later there were people I knew who were killed. They were they were deemed missing for a while. But I was surprised that I felt what was happening so deeply and in such a physical way. And for me, it was very eye-opening that it was like that connection to Israel that so many of us have. I won't say every single Jew has it, because certainly since October 7th, we've seen a lot of different, expressions of Jewish identity, shall we say. But yeah, it was just eye-opening to me that it's like I am connected to Israel in a really fundamental way, that when the country is hurting, I'm hurting, and I feel a deep sense of connection to what's happening there and to the people. And, even still, it's like we talk about a post October 7th, and in so many ways, we're still in the middle of it. I mean, the fact that it's like we have around 20 hostages still living in Gaza, which I personally have not, and I don't think any of us should like move on from that day until they're home. And just this intense wave of anti-Semitism that day unleashed, which was very surprising. So, that was also complicated having a Black and Jewish identity, because I was quite disappointed, and this isn't the case for every one of our allies or everyone in the community, but that I had felt, very quickly so abandoned by groups that I had advocated with and identified with, Black Lives Matter, for instance. So yeah, it affected me in a number of ways, but I was just a real surprise of how deeply I felt what was going on and continue to feel.
In terms of your maybe you could just take us through just even logistically your conversion journey and the timing of it. I think you've articulated, by the way, very, very well how we all felt, well, not we all, but I know many of us, and certainly all three of us, the sense of just physical illness that really probably has been somewhat muted as the days go by, but is still there, certainly in all of us, and of course in all of the families of the remaining hostages. But I would like to understand the logistics of, as you said, you found Project Ruth, thankfully. Well, your conversion, actually, Adam, it's a question for you. Is this the first time you have converted someone who knew they were halakhically Jewish, was not only halakhically Jewish, but a leader in the Jewish community, sort of indisputably Jewish, but sans paperwork, let's say, right? Which I would be too, and as you said, you would be. Is that the first time, Adam, you've done a conversion like this? And then, Tiffany, I want to ask you what it felt like. Do you feel more Jewish? Do you feel just officially Jewish? How does all of that play in? This is so fascinating and so unique.
So, first of all, that's a great question. You know that the former Soviet Union, Jews had an issue because they didn't have paperwork, or even if they had paperwork, they lost the paperwork. So this is a big problem in Israel, where you have tens of thousands of Russian Jews who can't prove their Jewishness. So mostly it's more of a problem in Israel than in the United States, because so many people left the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, for Israel. But yeah, so we have had that, those kinds of situations. But it never was like Tiffany's case. It always was a case where, the mother was kind of Jewish, and there were Jews in her family and also non-Jews in the family. And she grew up, and she, they lit candles, but they also went to church, and they weren't sure how to identify themselves. So therefore, the person goes to the mikveh again. The short answer to your question, Meredith, is never. We've never had anybody like Tiffany. Nobody whose mother, and Tiffany very proudly says all the time, my mother, she's Ashkenazi, right? We never had anybody whose mother was Ashkenazi, whose grandmother was Hungarian. You can't get more Jewish than Ashkenazi and Hungarian. But nevertheless felt as if she wanted to kind of solidify that Jewish identity. And it came about because of a communal issue, not a religious issue. It wasn't like Tiffany was getting married and her in-laws said, I don't, this sounds suspicious to me. That wasn't what it was. It was a communal thing in Zurich, which also was interesting. And I think, Tiffany, that's fascinating because, as we know, in America, you don't have those things, right? Tiffany, you lived in Washington for a long time. We live on the Upper West Side. If you wanted to join the DC or the New York Jewish communities, you'd find a shul. Tiffany has her shul in DC. She has her rabbi. And the rabbi, of course, would say that Tiffany is Jewish. So there's no idea of being accepted by the community, right, Meredith? On the Upper West Side, you go to your rabbi and he accepts you, then it's fine. But Tiffany dealt with something that's uniquely European. And that is that what happens in the community is defined by the community. And they say in or out. and they basically told Tiffany out. And I think of Tiffany, I know that we're talking about a lot of different things, but we're really asking you how you feel as this Jew who felt that she was on the margin and how you dealt with this.
Well, would you actually, can we back up for a minute, Tiffany, would you have had this conversion had you not moved to Zurich and been told you could not be on the email list, let's say, but join the community? Do you think that you would have found your way to Adam, Mince, and Project Ruth if you had not been in that situation?
Probably not, because the situation forced me into a line of questioning that I think was ultimately really healthy, but I would not have gone through that process, had I not in North America, like, as you're saying, it's like, not only would you email the shul or the rabbi and they'd be like, sure, you can join. Here's like the payment form, but they're like really excited for everyone to join. And so it was very different from what I experienced here, which I should also just say, it is a beautiful, beautiful, close, obviously very closely knit, but very connected community here. But this process, I know I'm Jewish, like in my heart, and different things like that. And in the North American sense, where you hear a lot of people say, well, if you feel Jewish and if you have Jewish identity and a Jewish soul, but it doesn't take into account halacha, Jewish law. And so in some ways it got me thinking, like, I don't feel like I've been duped my whole life, but I just, that part, it was never part of the conversation in that way, that it's like, but there are these very real laws and standards that we have that we need to follow. And so I think that was a healthy, though jarring at first, process to go through and to understand. And I also, I had my DNA tested just for fun, like everyone was doing a couple years ago, and now had to like take it all offline because the company's bankrupt. But I was like, I'm 48% Ashkenazi Jewish. And I was like thinking too, well, what is that 2%? And I know my mom and my grandmother and my great grandmother are Jewish, but beyond that, we can't trace our line. So I was also just thinking, like, let me just make it official, not just for this community, but for myself, so that it's like, I know in my heart of hearts, I've gone through this process. Also, when I learned about Project Ruth, I was in Paris, and I think I emailed you, Rabbi Adam, on the way home, or I was at the airport. Anyway, he's on it. We got on the phone as soon as I was in the taxi on the way home from the airport. We got on a WhatsApp call, and he's telling me about Project Ruth. And then it turns out, like, I know the rabbis who sit on the Beit Din, the amazing, just like top-notch rabbis and educators. And so I think at that point, whether or not I needed it for Zurich, I was like sold and wanted to do it. So I feel very, very lucky. And I think the process I went through, which was also somewhat individualized, but I also went through a process with some of the best rabbis on the planet and the most creative, dynamic, forward-thinking, but also very literate rabbis. And so I think my process, especially since I started talking about this with other people who've done it, it looks very different, because it was a very warm, welcoming, beautiful, exciting.
Yeah, I want to convert. I don't have paperwork,
You should
but
do
maybe
it.
I should convert. I mean, honestly, honestly, Tiffany, well, first of all, it speaks volumes about you, not just as a Jew, but as a person, that you weren't turned off by that community, that you were so, obviously this is what you devote your life to, right? Is creating warm Jewish communities for people who may not be as identified as they could have been. That's what your work is, right? It's all about the Jewish community. So I think it's remarkable that you were not put off by that. And the way you're describing, it actually does speak to the value of learning, of Jewish literacy. So maybe you'll be starting a trend of halakhic Jews who decide to convert, because honestly, it's the most beautiful and sort of profound and inspiring and thought-provoking description of conversion I've ever had. Certainly, I'm telling you, Adam, I got no paperwork. After this, I'm going to get on that same call. But so what was the most powerful moment of the conversion experience for you?
I mean, I'll just start at the beginning and learning that Project Ruth exists, like that somebody has taken this problem, which was, and I will say, I was put off. I was really, I cried. I took like a full day to think about what I wanted to do. I talked to my family about it. Like I was really sad. And yeah, I was put off. But I think probably the biggest trait I inherited from my mom, besides like my Ashkenazi background, is the chutzpah. And I'll use it in like the Israeli way, that it's like, it's not necessarily a good thing that I have so much chutzpah usually, but I don't know if they actually expected me to go through this full process, or they thought, oh, the American, she'll probably leave in a year. And it's like, no, 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 I'm going to come back. Just give me a couple months and I'm going to get this together. And I'm very excited to be a part of the community. But just learning, like the most exciting piece was just learning that this is an option, that this is a real problem that bars people from being able to experience the full breadth and depth of Jewish life. And there's a group of amazing rabbis who have thought creatively about this to expand our circle, and not in a loose way, but in a way that like really brings more people in who are committed and will, my hope is, like add vibrancy and depth to the community. So that was the first piece. And during the actual process itself, going to the mikvah, first of all, it's stunning. Like, it's beautiful. I live in Switzerland, the country of spas, and I was like, this is a real spa-like experience. I wonder if there's like a membership punch card or something, because I would go all the time if I could. But the actual dunking is very, and you prepare for it and you go in with intention and you say the blessings and everything like that. But that I really felt something powerful after that first dunk. And when I got out of the mikvah, we left, and I really felt different. And I go out into New York City. It was raining like crazy that day. And, you're in the middle of New York City. And I was like, the city looks so beautiful and glittering. Like, my vision had changed for that moment. And people were being nice to me and smiling at me. Again, it's the middle of New York City. For anyone who doesn't live in New York City, like, that is not normal. And there's actually like trash everywhere. But it was like, I just like, yeah, I felt very different, and it was an amazing, powerful day, and it was a really just moving and emotional experience. And I got to be there with Rabbi Adam and the other Rabbi Adam Gindia, who I was studying with, and yeah, it was a beautiful, special day, and I feel different. And now I have this, it's a piece of paper, but it means so much. And it's also my ticket to access to Jewish life. Now I can go to Jewish holiday. Like, we couldn't go to services before. So it really changed everything. I'm very thankful for it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining Project Ruth. Thank you for reading our article. And it really, it's so heartwarming to hear the story and how it transformed your life, because we know that you transformed Jewish lives. And I wanted to pivot just a little bit to talk about, in your work with Mem Global, do you work with people who've converted to Judaism? And do you find that they're a certain unique group, that they look at Judaism, look at Israel differently than people who were born Jewish?
Yeah. So I should say, for Mem Global, for my organization, in order for someone to not participate coming to programs, but to be a community builder, we say that they need to identify as Jewish. Now, we're not checking paperwork or asking if they're halakhically Jewish. Some people are in the process of conversion. Some people have a Jewish parent, Jewish grandparent, but they have, again, in the North American sense, like a Jewish identity, and they're committed to running Jewish programs. That's enough for us. And then, of course, we provide like a Jewish educator in the training. So we kind of like, take it up a couple notches, I like to think. But that's our standard, and it works well for us in many, many parts of the world. There is some friction for us in communities like the one that I'm currently in, or other places where they say, no, like, in order for us to support or be aligned with this program, they need to be halakhically Jewish, and we need proof, and they need to be members of the community, which works for some. And for others, it comes with all kinds of restrictions. So it is a wide spectrum of people from different backgrounds or different processes or different places in their conversion. I don't know if I've like ever noticed any major difference. I recognize the fact that for somebody to join, I probably look at them a little bit differently, of just like, I'm so thankful that someone has made the choice to like throw their lot in with the Jewish people. And I know the kind of commitment and time and work and money and effort that it takes to do. I mean, it's not like it was so worth it, and it's not incredibly expensive, but I know that they've gone through this process, and that, without something like Project Ruth, it's not always like a warm, welcoming experience. So they've done a lot to get to this point. So I'm just very appreciative of that. But I wouldn't say in their commitment or engagement, they're just Jews like the rest of us, and committed to building a stronger Jewish future, and so appreciative to have them in our community.
I feel like you, Tiffany, in your story, which is so unique and so specific to living outside of, North America and the community that in which you found yourself. Um, Again, and of course, I'm sure, yes, you said it was very upsetting and off-putting at first, but um, there are people who find the whole idea of being, quote, told to convert or forced to convert if they're a non-Jew and they, in a relationship with a Jewish person, et cetera. I feel like you are uniquely positioned to really talk about, the way you just described, for you to feel such a sense of internal spiritual transformation, and you were and are a Jew, I feel like that message about even if you are Jewish, if for whatever reason, and not everyone's going to find themselves living in Zurich, but that perhaps your embrace on a very deep level of conversion as becoming closer to who you are and always have been, or perhaps more literate about it, or embracing of the communal requirements, the more you talk about that can be so healing for those who might feel that conversion means that that have a negative idea of conversion. Do you feel like are there people you've met in your life, and Adam, I want to ask you too, because this is what you do and this is who you are. Have people come to you where you could see maybe they felt pushed into doing this rather than they chose to do it?
The one I'm very curious to hear from Rabbi Adam on that piece, because certainly you've seen a lot of cases at this point. But after my conversion, I put a story up on social media because, when I started talking about the situation I was in, it was by being public about it that someone told me about Project Ruth. And so I want to pay it forward. And I know that there are a lot of people in my situation, or they don't even know that they're in my situation yet, but it's an option for them. So, to let them know that this is out there. And I got a lot of really amazing messages and a lot of shout outs to Rabbi Adam, but I also got a lot of horror stories. Like, I think that there are a lot of people in the community who have had a pretty negative experience with this. So that's not what it's supposed to be like. And it certainly doesn't have to feel like that, but that it was sort of like a gotcha moment. And so I think it really matters, like, where you do this process and who you go through this process with. And the, guidance I would probably give is to, like, Google Project Ruth, but also just I had a conversation with Rabbi Adam, and I immediately felt welcomed and accepted, and like knew that this would be a very healthy, happy, and strengthening process, versus others that, other experiences. So yeah, all that is to say that it matters who you go through this process with.
So I appreciate that. And of course, Meredith, you hit the nail on the head, because Tiffany's experience is not everybody's experience. And of course, Tiffany came at this experience, or to the experience, and to Project Ruth yourself, Tiffany. There was nobody pushing you to do it. A little bit the community in Zurich, but you didn't need the community in Zurich. You're you. You're part of, a global Jewish community. And if you wanted to say, okay, I won't go to services in Zurich, so you won't go to services in Zurich. You decided that it made a difference. But there are so many people who convert with us. And just to give you a sense, in 2024, we converted almost 200 people. In 2025, now we're at the end of June, so we can begin to assess, we're ahead of that schedule. Means if this continues, we're going to be converting more than 200 people. And we have about 120 people in our pipeline. Rabbi Leaner and Rabbi Molotek and Rabbi Gindia, they teach our Jewish questions classes. And that's basically our 22-week introduction to Judaism classes. And there are 120 people already signed up for the class who are going to come through to be ready to go to the mikvah over the next 12 months. So, what's coming up is also very exciting in terms of, who's preparing and who's going to go to the mikvah. But so many people come to this, or some people, let's say it that way, come to this because they're being pushed by others. Somebody, a young woman who's marrying into an Orthodox family. You see, if she's not Jewish, it's one thing, right? So you say she's not Jewish. A family insists that their son marries a Jew, so she has to convert. Those kinds of cases, people can start with mixed feelings, but eventually I think, if it's a good relationship, they realize it each does for the other one. But sometimes you have a different situation. Sometimes you have a young man, it can be a young woman too, but let's talk about a young man from an Orthodox family, probably himself not really Orthodox anymore, but it depends, who's going out with a young woman who grew up Jewish, totally Jewish. They had Shabbos every Friday night. They lit candles. They fasted on Yom Kippur. They went to synagogue, all the things. But her mother had a conversion that was not Orthodox. Her mother had a reform or conservative conversion. For whatever reason, right? 30 years ago in the 1980s or 1990s, they were connected to a conservative or a reform rabbi, and therefore they had a conservative or reform conversion. The family that she's marrying into won't accept that conversion. So she's totally Jewish, right, Tiffany? Totally Jewish. She grew up Jewish. She knew she was Jewish. There was never a question about her Judaism. Now she's 25 years old. She wants to marry the love of her life. And his parents say, not good enough for us. You need to convert. Now, from what Tiffany described as a halachic perspective, from the technical legal perspective, it's correct that the Orthodox want Orthodox conversions. They define Judaism in terms of their denomination. And that's always going to be true in every religion, that you're going to define the religion by your denomination and by your interpretation of Jewish law. But psychologically, Meredith and Tiffany, that's such a difficult situation because she's being forced to undergo this conversion process, even though she considers herself completely Jewish. And that's one of the biggest challenges of Project Ruth. And thank God the rabbis, who Tiffany knows so well, they're so attuned to these people and these kinds of situations that they're able, usually, nothing's ever perfect. They're usually able to take these people in and to show them what can be nice about this Orthodox conversion without rejecting where they came from. Even though the family may require this extra conversion, but the way they grew up, the Judaism they had, the Jewish community they were part of, the Jewish family they were part of, they're not breaking from that and starting something new. They're adding to that. And
well,
I think
why Tiffany's story is so powerful, that Tiffany herself could be speaking. I mean, if you, with all your free time, Tiffany, I feel like you could communicate that to people who may have some painful feelings about being forced to accept that. Because I didn't mean to cut you off, Adam, but I just thought, don't you see, we've solved that problem. And she's sitting right there. Someone who says, I may have felt mixed feelings about it, but I got so much from it. But anyway.
Well, I mean, what do you mean? As I'm listening to this podcast, I'm thinking about all the ways I'm going to use this podcast. Wait till I send it to Rabbis Gindia, Leaner, and Molotek, and all the nice things Tiffany said about them. And now you're right, that people should be listening to this, and people in Tiffany's situation that you talked about posting your story on social media. And, people... We're big believers. Let me take it one step back. We're big believers in Project Ruth that we need to share the story of Project Ruth. I'll tell you just a little story about Project Ruth. Within Orthodoxy, basically since the 1800s, Orthodox Judaism has performed conversions. Before that, it was illegal for a Christian to convert to Judaism. But starting around 1800, Jews were granted citizenship in Germany. Illegally, the Christian church did not allow people to convert to Judaism. But starting around the year 1800, Jews were accepted in German society. There was something they called a neutral society. You weren't defined by your religion. Like when you walk on West End Avenue, Meredith, you're not defined by your religion. It's a neutral society. And so therefore people began to convert to Judaism, and they began to convert to Orthodoxy. And Orthodoxy has converted people. And, in the United States and through 2025, Orthodoxy, even the most Orthodox, convert people based on different kinds of situations. But it's always been the policy that conversions within Orthodoxy have been quiet. They were never covered in the media. No one wrote articles about them. If you need a conversion, right, Tiffany, you'll find the rabbi. I don't know how you'll find the rabbi, but you'll find the rabbi. You'll go to your rabbi, he'll do it. You'll go to your rabbi, he'll send you to somebody else. But it's kind of this secret. You needed the secret key to get into the treasure chest of conversion. And we decided in Project Ruth that we needed to break that model of the treasure chest. We needed to share with people the opportunity to convert in an accessible, welcoming way. And therefore, thanks to Jeannie Suk-Gerson, who was one of our converts and also a contributing editor to The New Yorker, she wrote up her experience, which featured Project Ruth. I would be lying to you if I told you that there wasn't some pushback to that article in The New Yorker. There's always going to be pushback because we publicized what other people, other Orthodox Batei Din have been doing, but they weren't talking about it. But the number of people that we have that joined Project Ruth since that article came out let us know that we made the right decision. And that's the reason that we started podcasts. And that's the reason that, that Tiffany, that you're able to tell your story to everybody. Because we want people to listen to your story. First of all, we want people to know what an amazing Jewish leader and amazing Jewish woman you are. But we also want to know that people to know that there are other people like you. And please God, there should be other people who should take leadership roles like you. And we're there for them to help them in their Jewish journey.
Amen to that.
Amen. I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you, Tiffany. We look forward to sharing amazing, the Jewish journey just begins going to the mikvah.
Right,
I don't have to tell you that. You know that better than anybody. And
I feel like now I've just entered the gates and it's like I've got a whole, there are so many different paths to continue on. So I'm excited.
And we know, Tiffany, that even though you're living in Zurich and you really identify with DC, we know that in your heart, you're really an Upper West Sider. So Meredith and I look forward to welcoming you to the Upper West Side.
Welcoming you home to the Upper West Side.
You said it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the conversation. Meredith, it was nice to meet you. Please say hi to Lori next time you talk to her.
I will. It was wonderful to meet you and to hear your story. It was beautiful and really important.
Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you again, Rabbi Adam. This was just such a great process. And I feel so fortunate to have gotten to do it with you and Rabbi Adam and the Brooklyn hipsters. So very lucky.
Amazing. Thank you so much.